Record. Yeah, let's just do it.
All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is your boy, Bunny 3000. We are back. This is the Geekswagg podcast. We are here with my esteemed guest, Mr. Greg Toppo. And I pronounced that right?
That's right.
Okay.
I find myself on the screen here.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to, let me see if I can get this going right here. There we go. Make it a bit bigger. There we go. Excellent. Yes. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on the show with us tonight.
It's my pleasure. It's really great to be here.
Yes, actually, and I was hoping I could have gotten the whole crew here. Usually I have two other co-hosts with me, Makita and Jason. Of course, Jason is on vacation. You know how the summer goes. And Makita was going to be with us here tonight, but she actually had to go to a co-worker's wake, unfortunately. So she was not able to make it, but I think I will hold it down for them in their stead.
Good.
So, Mr. Toppo, I have been all into your book for like the past week and some change, and I definitely must say, I'm pretty certain you get this a lot. When people first walk into trying to read your book, they expect one thing, and they typically come out of the experience with a whole other perspective, regardless of which way they actually think that the book feel that the book is intended to go. For those of you guys who don't know, The Game Believes in You, How Digital Play Can Make Our Kids Smarter, is a book that Greg Toppo has written. When did it come out? It came out earlier this year, right?
It came out in April.
In April of this year. Okay, yes. And basically, and I'll start it this way. I'll say the way I thought that the book was really going to go about was be a straightforward explanation of why video games are not bad. That was my perspective, coming into the book and everything. And I noticed, and of course, as a great journalist does, you came in a lot of different angles in explaining just different aspects of not only just using video games, but gamification and just concepts of game theory in order to bring about some sort of learning, and just showing how it happens in a way that encourages kids to take risk and not to fail. And like just like your title says, I think you even have it in one of your chapters. And if I do remember correctly, you were talking in this particular instance, you were talking about a math learning game where a little digital penguin was basically encouraging kids to go, to continue to learn math. Okay. And I think, as you were saying that, I can't remember exactly what. Do you remember the quote specifically where?
Sure. When I'm talking about the penguin, or when I'm talking about the title.
The title, yeah, the title. How it came about,
sure.
That kind of.
I mean, I do. I kind of explained the title, as you say, kind of early on when just after I've introduced everybody to this little penguin, who is essentially a digital penguin who sort of crosses your screen when you're playing this math game, and for lack of a better term, sort of encourages the player to keep going, to try again, to make mistakes, give it another shot. And what I say is, it's sort of a bit of code with a simple message: never give up.
Right.
And that's, having been a teacher and covering education, that's a major stumbling block for a lot of kids when they come across difficult work, just giving up.
Yes.
And anything that can get the job done a teacher would say, is an improvement. And so, when I explained sort of the title of the book early on, it's actually an interesting. If you read it and look at the little footnote that I have after the explanation, what you'll realize is that I admit in the footnote that I kind of stole the idea a little bit.
Okay.
From a couple of psychologists who talk about how games are kind of one step beyond stories. And what they talk about is that sort of when you pick up a book, when you read a story, you sort of imagine you are the hero, right? Right. If you read the Iliad, you imagine that you're Achilles. Or if you read the Odyssey, you imagine you're Odysseus. And it's been like that for thousands of years. And what they say is that you go into this. You go into the project of reading the book with this idea that you as the hero, no matter how bad things may get, you can get through it. You can succeed. You are going to win in the end. Right. And what they say is that games sort of take that to the next level. That you're not just reading about the hero. You are playing as the hero. You are doing the things the hero does. And that's why this is such an important idea. So you said yourself, in case other people don't know that you were a teacher at one point. What grade levels did you teach? So I taught. My first jobs were in high school. I taught high school English and writing. Okay. And then I taught elementary school, 4th grade. Okay. And it was hard. I mean. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I got it, because not only did I want to spend my time writing, but teaching was hard. Yeah. And I didn't know if I had the patience for it for the rest of my life. Yes, I have to admit, especially when I decided to take on doing the interview and reading the book myself. I'm actually married to a teacher. My wife is she's an early education teacher, so I'm constantly barraged with a lot of different angles on how the state of education is now, where it's going, how early education is almost a newer field, that kind of thing. And we discuss a lot of every once in a while, I see her discussions with her co-workers and her past workers on how, some of the different talk in the news, especially some of the recent talk in the news about how, so many challenges with education and Common Core testing and, a lot of parents trying to bypass the testing standards and all that other kind of stuff. So, no, go ahead. I mean, not to interrupt you, but I mean, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of honor teachers in this book, really not make them the enemy or sort of pit games against teachers. A lot of people, kind of, to your introduction, I think a lot of people come to this book thinking, the big idea is that video games and computers are going to replace teachers. Right. And what they find if they read the book is that it's just the opposite. That my feeling about this world is that we're going to succeed only if we can give teachers a way to stay in the game and to use games as sort of a better tool. The stupid analogy I've been using lately, and you can tell me if you think this is stupid. A lot of people say, you want to just like gamify school? Is that what you're trying to do? And what I say is, no, not really, and I don't think that would actually work. Because, if you want a big solution like that, I think it's bound to fail. So, and the analogy I've been using is that, if do you have kids? Do you have kids? Yes, I do. So if you went into their classroom, and actually in probably the classroom that you were in, classrooms that you were in when you were a kid, every classroom in America has got 2 pencil sharpeners, right? Pretty much, yeah. It's got the one on the wall, right? Yeah. It's screwed to the wall, and that eats everybody's pencil. Yeah. Okay. And then the other one is the one that works, the one on the teacher's desk. And it's the one she probably bought with her own money because she realized it was a better tool. It was a better pencil sharpener. And so in a way, that's one of the ways I'm trying to sort of get people to think about this idea of games and education, that if it's a better tool, we should use it. If it's not a better tool, don't bother.
Right.
If it is, it's worth exploring.
Right, because I remember, because like you said, like I said before, I have kids, so I was kind of invested in this topic a little bit and definitely wanted to bring this to light. In particular, I've got two sons that have ADHD. And of course, we've had our little challenges of trying to keep them focused and, trying to keep them on task, making certain that they aren't, that they aren't bored, because that's definitely a key part of your book that you speak about, how, a lot of the way education today is kind of structured is so dated. That that there's a need for a bit of infusion of what's current and what's grasping kids' attention today, to some degree. I
think you're right, and a little bit more thinking more kind of purposefully about how you get and keep someone's attention. I think that's something that good teachers do all the time, and I think we all need to think about that a little bit more. So yeah, that was a really big topic for me, getting people's attention, why we pay attention to certain things and not others, what keeps us paying attention, what keeps us interested in the topic, and I don't really go too much into the brain science of it, but I go a little bit, kind of like a taste of the brain science.
Yeah, that was a deep chapter. I remember that one, the neuroscience of it. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not a neuroscientist. It's basically just my own kind of reading as a kind of a, kind of an outside, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just someone who's curious about the topic and who really wanted to find out more about it. So that was I think really key, something I wanted to do and something a discussion I wanted to include in one of the chapters, especially at the beginning of the book, just to give people kind of like the lay of the land, to understand. Forget educational games, just talk about video games in general, to help people understand why they suck people in so much, adults and kids, why they grab our attention and sort of won't let go. Because that was a question that I had, for myself. I'm not like a huge gamer, but, the games really did at a certain point in my life get to be very interesting to me, and I really wanted to know more about how they were working, how they were influencing what I did and what I thought about, and how did that game get me to forget sitting and playing for 4 hours. How about thinking about it the next morning?
Right, when you weren't even playing it.
Yeah, that was I was really fascinated by. So yeah, I wanted to kind of give people a little taste of that too.
So that kind of brings me to my other question. How did you even come about the idea to even write this book?
Yeah, a couple of things were sort of happening all at once. I got a chance to take a year off from day-to-day reporting in a fellowship at Columbia University, and I basically got the chance to think a little more deeply about the topic that I was interested in at the beginning of all this, which was reading in America. What's happening to reading with our kids. I'd had this kind of interesting, slightly troubling conversation with one of my daughters, who was about 10 at the time, and I asked her what her favorite book was, and she didn't have a favorite book. And I thought, straight A student, loves science and math and music and sports. But
very involved, but no books.
Like the kid we want to clone, as I say, book. Yet she didn't have much of a relationship to books, and barely any real relationship to reading. So I was sort of curious about that. And what I found was that, it really required me to kind of think a little more deeply about kids' relationship to media and what was happening then. With at that point, now we're going back almost 10 years. People were talking about, how kids couldn't pay attention and no one could read a book at one sitting. and how digital natives were somehow different from us. They multitasked, and what's all about multitasking? What's the sort of the black magic taking place there? It's interesting. We don't really talk about multitasking anymore at all. We've kind of, my sense is that we understand it now, but it's not really multitasking. It's just doing one thing and then another thing and then another thing. Very short bites,
Yep.
But anyway, to answer your actual question, I was really interested in kids and media and what kids' relationship to their media was. And video games just seem to be in the air. They just seem to be this sort of thing that wouldn't go away. And at the time, so by now it's about 2010, 2011, this first school built around play is opening up in New York City. I'm really curious about it. This topic is just kind of on people's lips, and I really wanted to find out more. There had been a lot of scholarship about it. There had been a lot of writing, academic writing about games and learning and, video games and, math and things like that. But what I found was the thing that was missing was, years after this topic had sort of taken root, there wasn't any real on-the-ground reporting from schools, talking to teachers, talking to game designers about sort of, okay, let's just kind of agree that this could work. How are we going to make it happen? How are we going to do it? And what's it look like on the ground? So that was what I was really interested in doing. I wanted to sort of provide like a reporter's point of view on this, what I thought was a really fascinating and kind of puzzling topic. So that's kind of how it took shape. And I just started, it's one of those things where you sort of just ask that little question, where are the teachers who were doing this? The floodgates just opened. I just kept meeting teachers and meeting game designers and meeting all these really interesting people who were just doing great stuff and having, this is not kind of irrelevant, having a lot of fun. I was really amazed by that. One of the things I say to people is that, as a journalist, somebody who covers education, you're constantly invited into schools. And one of the things people want you to see is the cool new thing they're doing.
Right.
And so you get these tours and you kind of, you get sort of the door opens wide and in you walk and everybody's like, wow, isn't this great? Check it out. And most of the time, I'm bored in 5 minutes and I want to get the heck out of there.
Right, because you've seen it before. You're like, oh, yeah, that's nice.
But what passes for innovation in a lot of schools is really boring.
Right.
It really, and if anybody asked sort of the kids, from the kids' point of view, they would say, been there, done that, give me something else.
Right.
So this, in a couple of ways was something I hadn't seen before, and to kind of get back to what I was talking about earlier, this was something that was really engaging kids' interest.
Right.
In a lot of these situations, a lot of the classrooms, the kids were sort of racing ahead of the teachers. When was the last time you saw that? That's really exciting to me.
That's rare. Yeah, definitely.
And and the other thing, just to get a little wonky, I've been covering education by then for about 15 years. One of the things that I'd found was that education is sort of divided into two worlds, two sort of intellectual halves. There's the one half that says we've got to get our kids doing really high level work. We've got to get them to compete. We've got to get rigorous. We've got to get tough. We've got the work's got to be harder. Okay.
Right. You kind of compare them with like maybe China or some other country, right?
Finland and Korea. And actually, exactly. Okay. So there's that one half, and then the other half, and these tend to be the people who actually work in the schools, are saying, our kids really need to enjoy what they're doing here. They need to have fun. They need to have a good experience in school. We need to get them involved in not necessarily sort of designing their schoolwork, but they need to have a say in what they're learning.
Right.
The school needs to be more of a sort of an alive place. Okay, so you've got these two halves, and they never talk to one another. I mean, they haven't in like a century.
Right.
And what I found was that talking about games and learning, not only were these two halves talking to one another, but they were the same people. I mean, it was a field where finally the same people were saying, we can have rigor, we can have really hard work, and we can have fun. And then that was like, okay.
It's like, I'm starting to see it.
Coming, you know? So, I mean, I think that was actually a surprise to me. But when I found it, I was like, okay, I think I found my topic.
Okay. So when you finally settled in and said, okay, gaming, you know, this I'm gonna go this route, I'm gonna look at it, I'm gonna start researching it. I mean, you said yourself you started delving a bit into the gaming culture, you got a console, you know, bought a few games, you know, just to play around and just kind of get involved in what in particular when you started playing. I guess I'll rephrase the question. What did you actually play, and was there a particular reason for, you know, what you chose at that time?
You know, I really kind of took a huge sort of broad interest in all kinds of games, and was really, really bad at just about every one of them.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, I probably shouldn't even be telling you this, but, you know, like, the first time I played Halo, so, you know, I sat down with Halo and, you know, kind of thinking, okay, you know, I'm going to approach this as, like, a researcher. I'm just going to, you know, think about how this game works, you know, how is it built? You know, how is it kind of keeping me going? And, you know, I hadn't played a lot of first-person shooters of any sort. Or a lot of games like this, you know, and so I kind of get my bearings, and I'm kind of, you know, kind of wandering around the world, and what I found was that I was so stressed, I was so kind of freaked out by what this game was asking me to do, that I got like physically ill. I like at one point like the vertigo of, you know, kind of like falling off cliffs and kind of walking in this 3D world and being shot at and trying to, you know, I mean, I don't know, stuff I don't have to describe to you.
Right.
This is my first real kind of foray into this world. You know, I actually, at one point, I just had to put the controller down and just like go into the bathroom and just,
sensory overload, right?
Take a moment. You know, just like, it was really astounding. Just like my brain just couldn't deal with what was on the screen. Right.
So, a lot of senses going on at one time. Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't the question, but yeah, I mean, but it's, to me, I mean, it gives you a good indication of, I was a total newbie in this whole thing. You know, I mean, I was just like diving in, you know, just to see what it was like. And I never really got good at any of the games. I really enjoyed a lot of the games. I got, at a certain point, I got obsessed with some of the Gran Turismo games, the driving games. And it's funny because the story I tell people, and I actually tell it, we'll get to this later, but tell it in the context of the whole violence question. You know, games and violence question. I actually talk about my experience with driving games, and the reason is because, so I work at, you know, as your little bottom third of your screen says, I work at USA Today. You know, and I have about a 40-mile one-way commute, so I drive 80 miles a day to get to and from work. And when I first got my first Xbox, I was driving to work and coming home and was just exhausted every day, and really couldn't function. Like when I got out of the car, you know, Washington Beltway traffic was just unbelievable and just terrible. But what I found was that the only thing I could do to calm myself down was to put on a driving game
and drive some more.
So, and like when I realized this one day, I like looked up and I was like, "Holy crap! What are you doing?"
Yeah.
You know, you spend 3 hours driving and then you drive for another hour. and what I realized was that in a way, playing a good driving game was like the opposite of driving. It was a different experience. I mean, I could go as fast as I wanted.
Yep.
I could hit stuff and just press the reset button.
Right.
I could drive in these beautiful, scenic, lush, you know, race courses from all around the world. I wasn't driving on the Washington Beltway.
Right.
You know, so in a way, it was like a kind of a fantasy driving. You know, it was like a anyway. I call it the opposite of driving.
Right.
Because you're driving, you know, you have a lot to worry about, and you can't stop worrying about it until you turn the keys off.
Yep. Until you get out of the car.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway.
Yeah. It's amazing how, you know, once people get past that one barrier of saying, okay, this is a video game, you know, boo video games, and they actually sit down and get immersed in their first game, whether it's one that's on a tablet or, you know, one that's on their iPhone or something like that. It's amazing to see, you know, that light switch just flip when people get immersed into it, you know, and and it could be something as simple as like a puzzle game, or, you know, I forget what it was. My wife started getting, you know, when she got one of her first iPhones, the first game that she got involved in was Words with Friends. And, you know, that was all her and her friends did for hours and hours and hours. And it was, she was amazed herself. It was like, oh, this is a game. I'm spending all this time on a game. You know, it's that kind of a feeling. It's very interesting to see it happen.
Yeah, and Words with Friends is kind of a perfect game in some ways, because it combines that challenge with also the social aspect of it, you know, which I think is really important. And one of the things I don't think we really give enough credence to when we're talking about games, you know, how important the social piece of it is, sharing what you're doing with your friends. Or, I mean, in this case, it's funny because Words with Friends is kind of a funny name for it, because a lot of the people you're playing with are total strangers.
Strangers, right.
But I guess Words with Strangers wouldn't sell many.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't sell to me with that. Yeah. They probably started off that way and then all of a sudden changed it. That's probably true.
That's right. Words with Perfect Strangers.
Right.
That's a terrible name.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was really fascinated by, and I'm not like the first person to realize this. I'm kind of the last in a way. What's this thing you're kind of talking about, which is that, you know, people use this word game to be kind of this light thing, you know, this something that's not really a challenge, something we shouldn't even really think too much about. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was this idea of a game having the possibility of being really, really hard. You know, not so hard that you can't do it, but just, you know, leveling up bit by bit by bit to where, you know, you find yourself doing something really hard, right? In very short order. And I think that's really it's a piece of gaming, I think, that non-gamers totally don't get, right? And I think it's actually a piece that I think even some gamers don't really think about too much either. But I think it's really important. I mean, you know, a lot of people say we shouldn't even use words like game. You know, it's like a different word altogether to describe what's happening. You know, in something really, really challenging, like a good video game. So I don't know. What's the thinking on that these days? I mean, is anybody coming up? I mean, does anybody really care about the word game, or
yeah, from what I've seen in the game industry itself, I think because they're kind of, you know, most of the developers and, you know, even the gamers themselves are so much in their own bubble, you know, just talking about, you know, games and their consoles, whether it's PC and all other kind of stuff. They're definitely not worried about, you know, whether or not it's called a game or what is defined as a game. Most of the time what they're concerned about is who consider themselves a gamer and why, that kind of thing. You know, that's typically what they're mostly concerned with. But I
mean, I had kind of a really disturbing Twitter conversation the other day with a couple of people who are really bent out of shape about this game, this educational game that deals with slavery. And one of the pieces of the conversation that kind of the only piece of the conversation that I was interested in was the question of, could a game address something like slavery? Could it teach you about something like slavery?
Right.
And one of the things that a lot of the folks in the conversation were saying is that, this is really disrespectful. Slavery is not a game, and to make it a game is to, kind of dishonor,
trivialize it,
slaves. And I can totally understand that point of view. But the thing that I was trying to say is, wait a minute, maybe we should just use another word because play is serious business.
Yes.
Like, something's happening. You're playing that can totally respect something serious and something, grave like slavery. So don't kind of, dismiss it out of hand just because you don't like the word game.
And it's kind of interesting is you kind of bring up that topic because every once in a while one of the viewers that's actually on the chat mentioned a game called BioShock Infinite, because and I think that particular game franchise has actually dealt with kind of, I guess you could say, controversial topics in terms of the storyline that it would bring about, and it dealt with a lot of racism and even dealt with a little bit with slavery in that game as well, and even to a point, and even religion, to a point where some players felt like they didn't want to play the game anymore, and they didn't want to they actually tried to get their money back because a portion of the game, in order for them to even to continue, they had to baptize the player in like a pool of water. And a lot of, I don't know how many, but there was definitely an uproar of, people that, like, oh, I'm not Christian, I don't believe in that, you shouldn't have to force us to do that in the game, I want my money back, that kind of thing. And, it's very interesting because almost to the point where you were talking about before, trying to use a different word other than game. Occasionally, even like with Gran Turismo, you'll see some of the game developers say this is actually a simulator. Yeah, this is a simulator. They try not to call it game. They say this is a racing simulator, this is a flight simulator, that kind of thing, just to kind of differentiate a little bit.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, but I mean, to your point about something like, BioShock, I mean, it goes pretty interesting places.
Yes.
Places that I think, to me, were formerly just reserved for a couple of things. Books, plays, and movies. Right? I mean, I mean, I think there's a really interesting conversation around this. Are games art, and can they be art? And I think, in a case like that, you're really, I mean, I'm not going to go, say yes or no, but I mean, they really are asking you to dig deep into something and really, consider how you feel about it.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah. I mean, anything that essentially, and I'm certain plenty of directors, artists, and writers, they always, are a part of the whole. This is a very important part of art, to be able to freely express, certain ideas and stuff that are involved in their art form. So, just like the game you were talking about that deals with slavery and everything, it's one of those things that artists are always looking for a way to, I guess you could say, generate that kind of discussion, generate that kind of debate. They're just trying to initiate it with their art, and it's very interesting because if it brings up that kind of an uproar, it's almost like, hey, success, victory. That was what they intended in the first place, to bring that issue to light.
That's right. I mean, one of the developers I talked to is actually a writer on one of the games that I look at. He says he's a novelist, and one of the things he says is, the enemy is indifference. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay if people get mad.
Right.
That's fine. We just don't want them to be bored and indifferent.
Right, and not care at all.
It's a really good point.
Yep, definitely. Definitely. Kind of to bring it a little closer to some of the things that you had in your book. One of the topics that you spoke about, and I think it's an actual chapter in there that we discussed before, the School Institute of Play, where we were talking about, hey, if you attempted to try to do or gamify an entire school, that it might not work. But for those who don't know, it's where in New York is it again?
In Manhattan.
In Manhattan? Okay, yeah.
It's in Chelsea neighborhood, Manhattan, kind of.
Okay.
18th Street, and yeah, it's a really fascinating place. It's called Quest to Learn, and it started out as a middle school, and it is now. I think they're graduating their first class in the spring.
Oh wow!
First high school class. So they've been around for now 5-6 years, I guess. I think this will be their 6th year. And yeah, it's a really, really interesting place. And like I said earlier, when I was first getting my feet wet with this topic, the school had just opened up with its first class of 6th graders. And, it took me a while to get invited. Well, not even invited. I kept asking, basically, if I could come visit.
Right.
It took me a while to kind of get my foot in the door.
Yeah, they probably had a long list when they first opened.
They had a very long list, and a lot of people, I think, who kind of didn't really understand it. I mean, I didn't understand it when I first stepped through the door.
From the sounds of it, they didn't quite understand it even to a point, right?
That's a really, yes, good point. It took them a while to kind of get their feet under them. But it was a really amazing idea. And I think it's still an amazing idea, and I think it's one of these places that had a rocky start, but I just think it just keeps getting better. The one thing that interested me the most about it, and still the thing that interests me really as much as anything, is the way they distributed human resources. And what I mean by that is that they had on staff, and they still have kind of part-time on staff, a group of game designers in-house 5 days a week, and they would basically be paired with the teachers, so that when teachers were teaching something difficult or trying to get across some point, they could turn to one of these game designers and say, we need a game for this.
Right.
And really, really, that, when I heard about that, my jaw just dropped. I thought, okay, this is something I need to check out.
And even to kind of clarify what you're talking about, not even just game designers in terms of video games, but they just make games, period.
Yeah, these
are all kinds.
These are people who, more often than not, they're getting out cardboard and dice, and really looking at board games, paper-based games, dice games, even just sort of conceptual stuff. There was a real premium placed on just game-like thinking, and how that could bring a point across about whether it's math or history, storytelling, and I just saw some really, really remarkable stuff, and it really challenged me to think like a game designer would, because I certainly didn't, and I still don't. But just to watch the steps that these folks went through to translate what the teacher wanted to how they would do it was just amazing. It really, just kind of very life affirming.
Yeah. I can imagine. I hear this from teachers all the time. It's when you walk into a classroom, they're like, it's very easy to see whether or not a teacher is a good teacher or not, in terms of just walking into a classroom, because they can sense the engagement, or they can sense or see the interest of the kids that are in the classroom. And how you know, and how typically traditional classrooms, it's almost one of those kind of, drill sergeant kind of, okay, this words, and I think you even talk about it early on in the book, how, whether it's a kid that's dyslexic or ADHD or something like that, all those words all the time, everywhere in the book, in their homework, on the, that would easily turn them off. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're dumb, but that just means, hey, they're bored with it, or it's slightly difficult for them to manage all these words and everything. And that kind of breaking that barrier, like you were saying, with the gamification, kind of gives them a it's almost like it gives them breathing room.
No, that's a good way to put it. And it's like a mental breathing room. It's really key. I mean, one of the things that really amazed me as much as anything about Quest to Learn was the idea that without giving up its standards, it really did look at school from the point of view of a kid and think about, what is it that they need and what is it that interests them, and how can they make things work? How can they build things and do things and try things that really puts them on the spot, really puts the student on the spot. So, I mean, in a way, you can just call it sort of interest-driven or project-driven school. But I think it's, to me, the best way to think about it is just student-centered. It really does use a lot of brain power to think about, okay, what the school needs to look like from the student's point of view. How do I keep students interested in what they're doing? How do I sort of help them think about the world in a way that it's going to keep them going? It's not going to be just sort of comply with the thing I want them to do this week or this month, but how can I get them to start something and just keep it going on their own? Right. Something where it doesn't always take the involvement of the parent or the teacher to get the kid interested in continuing it. That's right. And interestingly enough, we haven't talked about Minecraft, but very early on in that school's history, one of the game designers started getting interested in Minecraft, and he brought it in as sort of almost like a lunchtime club. There might have even been a Minecraft club at lunch with some of the students. And Minecraft just sort of swept over this school like a virus. Wow. Which is in a way kind of a natural thing for a place like that. And it really got kids very, very kind of psyched about it. I tell a story in the book, in the chapter about Quest to Learn. One of the students I interviewed, he decided he was going to, I just love this story, so I'm going to tell it. He got very much into Minecraft, and one day he was sitting there playing, and he wondered, how far down does this world go? I mean, Minecraft is about digging, right? So how far can I dig? And he just started digging. He just started creating this square hole in the world, and he just kept going down and down and down and down and down. And I want to say he said he worked for like 60 hours. And, I don't think it was all at once. And eventually he got to the bottom. He hit rock bottom. He couldn't go any further. And so he built himself a ladder. And he climbed out of the hole. And then he charged his friends $5 in Minecraft money to throw themselves down the hole.
Just to see what's down there, right?
Just to see what would happen and how long it would take.
Oh, wow. How old was he again?
So this was a kid who would have been, I don't know, ninth grade.
Okay, yeah.
I just love that story. You don't know what's going to occur to someone.
Yeah, and honestly, even as a gamer, it's taken me a long time to really appreciate Minecraft for the brilliance that it really is. And I can't even remember the name of the I guess it was a biography or a movie where, you know, they basically followed Mahjong and the developers and everything. Notch and the crew. And a part of that movie, they actually showed how the developers had, I guess, given it to a school, and the school was using it, and the kids were getting interested in the teachers. You know, even the other teachers that were coming into that one teacher's classroom to see what the kids were doing. You know, at first they, of course, had their conceptions like, oh, it's a video game. What can they really be doing in here that's, you know, of any worth? But then they would go from each kid's screen and see what each kid built. And, you know, most of the time they were just like, the teacher was just like, yeah, I just showed them how to build a door, this and that. And they let them go free, and they would just see all the amazing creations. The kids would just, boom, you know, they would spend the rest of the day and make these amazing creations. And, you know, and even myself, for my kids, I would sit there and be like, wow, what in the world is going on? You know, you've been doing, this is what you've been doing, you know, just being amazed at some of the creations. And I would look at what they were doing, and then I would look at my Lego sets that I was hoping that they would get interested in. And I was like, that's what the Minecraft is. It's their Lego set. You know, they're more interested in that.
You know, and you know, a lot of kids who like Minecraft like Legos too. You know, I mean, my personal take on this, I don't have kids who are interested in this anymore. My kids are older, but what I see is that Minecraft scratches this really interesting itch, which is that our kids just don't have enough chances in their day to create stuff and share it. I think that's really you know, something that Minecraft does really well.
It was kind of funny, actually. My co-host Jason, he's got 3 girls, and you know, one's in high school, and I think she is a sophomore this year, and then he's got 2 other little girls, and one is, I guess she's in 7th or 8th grade, and then the other one is in 6th grade. And the 6th grader, I guess you could consider herself a little Minecraft entrepreneur, and he didn't even recognize that she was doing this until, you know, like maybe 6 or 8 months after she had started playing it. But she had been taking his iPad, you know, and playing Minecraft on it and everything, and she began making instructional videos on how to do, just, you know, how to create certain things and many things, and she had been sharing them with her friends. And her friends were asking, well, how do I do this? She was like, you know what, I'm gonna make a video. So she has all these videos, that she's just given to her friends to show them how to just do little simple things or even somewhat complex things in Minecraft. And I was like, Jason, I was like, you've got to either get this on YouTube, you've got to, you've got to get this out there, because I mean, it's amazing how, like you said before, you give a kid a tool and they decide to run with it. You gotta like encourage it, you know. You gotta push it out there, because who knows where they can take it, you know.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. At least it is for me. Anytime I see my kids going and doing anything like that of that sort. But actually, I did want to kind of talk to you a bit. Another topic we kind of touched on earlier, just talking about how just violence in video games, and how it's perceived and everything. And I think somewhere in your book you actually touch upon this. Is that correct?
I mean, it happened kind of in an interesting way. The chapter on games and violence is later in the book, and it's later in the book for a reason. What happened was, I started reporting the book, I started writing, and I started talking to parents. And one of the things that happened was that I would meet parents and I would say, oh yeah, I'm writing this book about games and learning, and do your kids play games? And they would say, well, of course they play games. And one of the things they wanted to know, interestingly enough, they wanted to know about 2 things. They wanted to know what I thought of Minecraft.
Of course.
And was their kids, usually their sons, gaming habit, going to make them a violent adult? They were really, really concerned with this. And a lot of kids, a lot of young boys playing first-person shooters and games like, Grand Theft Auto, and even, sort of older games, like Mortal Kombat.
Right, yeah.
And they were totally freaked out. They would walk by the living room or the basement and hear, gunshots and explosions,
right,
screaming, and they couldn't help but wonder, like, is my kid, becoming a psychopath?
Right.
Am I training my kid to be a serial killer? And so I basically, this topic wouldn't go away. I didn't even plan to write about it. It was kind of in a way outside of the purview of what I was focusing on, which was, math games.
Right.
Cool science games, teaching physics.
Right.
And wonderful history games. And here, like all people could talk about was, Call of Duty. So I thought, all right, I can't write a book about games and kids without thinking about this a little bit.
Right.
So I did. So kind of like just about everything else, I said, okay, I'm just going to devote some time to this. And I started reading about it, and I started doing some research, and I started talking to some experts. And what I found was that, just like a lot of things in this world, the reality is pretty much 180 degrees in the other direction from what we as adults think.
Right.
That is like almost every topic, about games, we're wrong. So, and that was like, okay, this is a cool chapter. This is a really amazing chapter. And one of the things that really cemented this, one of the things that I thought, I gotta write about this, was the findings from the Sandy Hook.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So, and I'm not going to give away the ending, but so one of the things they found when the state police in Connecticut investigated the Sandy Hook shooter, the kid who killed 26 people in that shooting 3 years ago in Connecticut, was that he was obsessed with an arcade game, and he would go every night for years and years to this movie theater a couple miles from where he lived, and play this game for hours. He even had an Xbox version. He had videos. He recorded videos of himself playing this game. And like I said, I'm not going to give away what the game is. But it's
I think I know which one it is. I think I've heard it.
That any of us would ever think that a kid who's going to be a school shooter is obsessed with.
Right. Yeah.
When I read that, I thought, okay, there's really something here.
Right.
There's really something that people need to understand about media and kids and what kids get out of games, even violent games, and maybe even in some ways especially violent games. They're getting, like the driving thing, they're getting almost the opposite of what we think they're getting. They're getting a release of tension. They're getting sort of a catharsis. They're confronting their fears.
Right.
They're being brave. They're rehearsing being brave. They're withstanding sort of this barrage of people trying to attack them, I mean, we call them first-person shooters. I think they're more accurately called first-person, like, hunting games. Because you're really being hunted, right? I mean,
pretty much, yeah.
Most of them. I mean, with the exception of one or two games that most of us don't play, I would say that I can't think of a first-person shooter where you're the only one with a gun, right? I mean, in just about every other game, somebody's trying to get you the same time you're trying to get them.
Right.
So what I tell people is that, when we worry that our kids are shooting things, we're only concentrating on half the bullets, right?
Right. That's a good way of putting it.
Shot at you.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a fun game to just wander around the world shooting defenseless people and things. I mean, I'm not going to deny that there are games out there that do that. I just don't think they're very popular.
Right. They definitely aren't that popular.
They don't sound like much fun.
Right.
so I really found, I mean, like I said, it was totally outside the purview of this book originally, but I was
inescapable,
really with what was actually happening. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So it actually led me down another rabbit hole, which was sort of the history of violent entertainment, the history of violent media. And I found that we have this sort of very long history with this stuff, going back to, penny novels and dime magazines and penny magazines and dime novels. Where people have always been obsessed with kind of nasty stuff,
right? That edgy, controversial, book or piece of media that seems to push that boundary that's put on that particular kind of media. Yep.
And what I talk in one of the chapters to a psychologist who treats young adolescent boys, and one of the things that he says, not to be too like parental about this, one of the things he says is that the kids in his practice who are the most fearful about life, the things that are happening around them, whether it's their parents' divorce or school isn't right or they don't have any friends or what have you, the kids who are most worried about that, the most fearful, are the kids who love the most violent media, whether it's movies, books, or games. And he feels like that's feeding a need that they have to be brave, right? To
confront something scary. Yeah.
I don't think that's something we really give too much credence to. I think we ought to. So, I mean, which is not to say that you won't get the 1 in a million gamer who goes and shoots up a school.
Right.
But statistically speaking, everyone's a gamer. So if games made everyone violent, everyone would be shooting up schools.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Clearly they're not. I mean, I even talk a little statistically in the chapter, and I say, that as the number of gamers has gone up over the past 20 years, the amount of youth violence has gone down. So
yeah, it's definitely an outlet.
Let's talk about that relationship.
yeah, definitely.
So maybe violent games are making us less violent.
Yeah, it's allowing them to get out those emotions and something a lot more constructive than actually doing it.
I mean, one of the researchers I cite in this chapter says, that crime rates in major cities go down when big AAA games come out.
That's interesting.
So think about what's happening there.
Yeah, that's definitely
by the way,
interesting.
They don't go down when like big movies come out or lots of other things that would involve young people happen.
Right.
It's only when big games are released.
Interesting. Yeah, that is definitely interesting. So I definitely remember, occasionally throughout the book from beginning to end, you always have these amazing stories about, and you typically, in the way you typically showcase this particular app or game that you begin to talk about in the book, you always showcase how a kid interacts with it and how they see it and how they respond to it before getting into showing how or what the game is actually trying to teach and everything. And and I kind of love that progression throughout the book because honestly, basically most of the games and apps that you kind of touched on in the book, I had never heard of any of them. And I felt horrible because I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of this. Because I thought I was pretty into hearing a lot of whatever was popular in terms of what game is popular coming to schools or educational things. I had never heard of like one of them, Dragon Box, and there was the other game that you were talking about. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it. That was teaching kids how to learn to code by actually having them play a game. Goodness, what was the name of that one? Because I think that was the chapter where you were speaking about
that. Was the one about that was actually the chapter about Quest to Learn.
Yeah.
I'm gonna forget the name of the game.
It's like GameStar.
GameStar Mechanic.
GameStar Mechanic. Yes. And yeah.
It's a game about designing games.
Yeah, and it was so interesting to see and hear about a lot of these different games, especially the Dragon Box one. If you don't mind, would you mind explaining that particular game?
No, absolutely. I mean, Dragon Box is a really fascinating piece of software.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's essentially a tablet game. It's I played it on an iPad,
Mm-hmm.
maybe on Android too now, but what it is, it's a game that invites the player to move around essentially cards on a board that's divided in two.
Mm-hmm.
And what you find is that you're moving the cards around to try to get rid of them, so that there's only one card on one side of the board at the end of each level.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the Dragon Box. This is actually a dragon in a box.
Mm-hmm.
It's adorable. It's a little cartoon dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And what you find is that you're essentially kind of messing with these cards on the other side in order to I'm not describing this very well, but in order to get the dragon all by himself on one side.
Right.
And level by level, you keep playing. You get what they call shadow cards, which you'll see soon stand in for negative numbers. And then you have to start thinking: do I subtract? Do I divide? Do I multiply? What do I do here? And eventually, the little pictures start getting substituted by symbols.
Mm-hmm.
So at a certain point, the dragon, just for like maybe one level, becomes an X. And you realize that it's X equals all this stuff on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of the game, by level 100, you're doing essentially what amounts to a really, really complex algebra problem.
Mm-hmm.
One, I can find the actual problem. Hang on a second. And if you want, what might actually be more helpful would be just kind of reading the last couple of sentences of that chapter, because I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you explained it really well.
Yeah, hang on just a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just bringing it up on my iPad, actually, the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So what happens is you start moving things around. You sort of substitute, one card for another, and then, like I say, these things start getting substituted. Maybe the dragon is an X, and one of the cards is a C, and eventually this goes, gets a little more complicated. And by game's end, the way I describe it is addition and multiplication, division, fractions, all of them appear without fanfare or explanation. You play 60 levels before an equals sign appears between the two sides of the board. By game's end, at level 100, you've moved seamlessly, baby step by baby step, from a cute baby dragon eating a spiky two-headed lizard to this. 2 over X plus D over E equals B over X, which you solve fearlessly and perhaps even a bit impatiently in exactly 14 steps. You are 4 years old.
Yeah, that's what got me.
So,
and I was like, wow.
Yeah, and that's what got me. I mean, there are lots of parents getting their little preschoolers on this game. Now, I won't say that it's for every kid.
Right.
I mean, it takes a kid with a certain kind of interest in logic, and in thinking logically to really stick with it through 100 levels. But I played the game several times, and that I describe what happens.
Yeah.
It's really kind of breathtaking.
Yeah, it was amazing when I was reading that part of the chapter. I was amazed. I was like, wow. I gotta go find this app. I definitely have to try to get my kids on it, because
and it's a strange
interesting
little game too. I mean, it's really kind of it's got a kind of a quirky sensibility that's really fun too. And that's one of the things I like about it too.
That is
awesome. So
awesome.
there were artists involved in the design of this thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That was really nice. Because a lot of educational games, until now, have really struggled. I think to get a player base, and one of the reasons is because they're not that beautiful.
Right.
They're kind of
plain.
Yeah, they're plain. There's no real effort put into the beauty of the thing. Mm-hmm. In a way, it's just like. It's like a interactive worksheet or
flashcards, like you were saying in one of the things. Yeah.
And I think something like Dragon Box, if you see it, it is whatever the opposite of a flashcard is. Mm-hmm. This is it.
Yeah. Yeah. So were there any others? I guess that you'd like to highlight that you also spoke of in the book from time to time, or maybe have encountered since you finished reading the book that are counted to the same effect of what you would consider a good edutainment kind of title rather than just a flashcard education title as we typically see.
God, there are actually more than I can even mention, but mm-hmm. one of the series that I just touch on really briefly in one of the chapters is this group of civics games that I actually I wanted to write about and never had time to really dig in while I was writing the book, but I ended up actually writing about them afterwards. It's a group of games called iCivics. I like the iPhone.
iCivics.
Small I, C, capital C, iCivics. And what it is, it's a series of now, I think there are about 20 games. And they were actually inspired by Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. When she retired from the bench a couple of years ago, she sort of confronted this reality that a lot of people didn't know much about American government, and didn't know about the Constitution, and didn't know what judges and lawyers did. And she basically got kind of freaked out about it and wondered, what she could do about it. And one of the things that somebody convinced her to do, actually, one of the characters in my book, Jim G, who's now in Arizona State, who's kind of in a way sort of the father of this movement, he convinced her. He said, "Listen, there's lots you could do, but you should really create some games." And so what she did was she commissioned a series of games in there. Like I said, there are now about 20 of them. Really, really remarkable games, really fun games, really challenging games, some of them hilarious games, teaching about different aspects of government and civics and history, how government works. Excuse me. And they're all, pretty much all of them, I think, with the exception of one of them, is built by a really fascinating developer in Madison, Wisconsin, called Filament.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a group of people who really, they kind of came out of the very beginnings of this movement, and they've really moved it along in an incredible way. They've done some great games, some beautiful games, really smart games. And they've actually, one of the things I think that's really important about them is that they've found a way to survive almost entirely by doing educational stuff,
which is rare.
They've really been smart about how they've invested. But one of the iCivics games that I really love, and the one I recommend to people, and the nice thing about it too is that it's free. You can actually, once you and I get off this interview, you could just go find it, and in 3 minutes you'll be playing it. It's called Do I Have a Right? And Do I Have a Right is this really interesting scenario. What it does is it puts you in the position of running a law firm where all your lawyers handle different kinds of cases. People come in with complaints that their rights have been violated, certain kinds of rights. I'm a high school kid and my locker was searched, or they won't let me buy a gun, or somebody won't let me shout fire in a crowded movie theater, and you have to match them up with the correct lawyer.
Oh, okay.
And so what you soon start realizing is that you have to pair essentially the amendment of the Constitution with the complaint.
Right.
and it gets very fast paced, and people don't want to wait around very long.
Right.
So you can't match them up very quickly.
Then you lose it.
And leave.
Anyway,
so the better you do, the more your law firm expands, and pretty soon, it's almost like, do you remember Diner Dash?
Yes.
It's almost like imagine Diner Dash, but instead of serving diners, you're matching lawyers with clients.
Okay.
It's hilarious. I feel.
Yeah, I can see that. Do I have a right? Yes, I'll definitely have to link to that. Definitely, because I know a while back I actually was trying to get into another game that I just picked up on because actually, in I guess you could say in real life, my day job, I'm an engineer, so I forget, I was looking through Edutopia or that site, and I think I saw like an ad for one of their games, for one of Filament Games things called Backyard Engineers, and of course I was like, engineers, beautiful, I gotta go check this one out. And it was, it was like you said, it was very innovative, it was very interesting, because I don't know if they do this with all of their games, but I know that with this particular one, they've got just the game itself. It gets progressively harder, of course, but they also had like almost a whole textbook that, if you were a teacher, that you could take that source material, and apply it to the game, and further expand upon different elements of the game, that kind of thing. And if you were just a kid, you could just jump in there and just play just because.
No, I think that's right. You bring up a really good point, which is that the game alone in a lot of instances isn't going to be enough, and that you do a lot of times need supporting materials. You do need something that a teacher can kind of sink their teeth into, as well as just a cool game. And you do a really good job of it. One of my favorite stories from the book was actually I talked to one of their founders, and I was talking about, and this is sort of, in a way apropos the whole, games and violence do games sort of harden our kids. One of the stories he tells is that they created this science game, and one of the tasks you have playing the game is to grow a sunflower, a digital sunflower. And so your task is to keep this thing alive. And you do the things you'd have to do. You have to water it and feed it, and learn about what's happening, photosynthesis, and all these different chemical reactions. And then eventually autumn comes, and no matter if you've been the best sunflower gardener in the world, the sunflower is going to die. Right. Yeah. And it shed its seeds. And what they found was when they were testing it with middle schoolers, by the way, not little tiny kids, middle schoolers, when the kids realized that their sunflower was going to die, he said they were just kids weeping. Oh, wow. Over their sunflowers. They were like, I grew this sunflower, no. And I told him when I saw him one day, and he told this story once at a games conference. And I told him, you have the best, exhibit A in why video games do not harden our kids. Because, even career gamers, they still cry over their little sunflower. Yeah. So. That's, I can see that. Actually, we had in the chat room, one of the viewers had a question for you. He said, wanted to ask you if you notice, I guess, from your research, whether video games have any negative effects on children, which I'm sure there are, but. You're sure what? Well, I'm sure there's some out there, so it's just interested to see, just in terms of what you saw just from your research, whether there was any. A bad game can really mess you up, right? It can really, and I guess I'm thinking about games more broadly, but talking about educational games too. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience. A bad game, it can be a real waste of time. And really sort of, there's even a term, right? Isn't the term gamer regret? Yes. Right? yes. Where you play a game for hours and maybe days, and then at the end of it, you're like, I didn't get a whole hell of anything out of that. Yeah, it's like, why did I decide to play this? Jeez, this is ugh. Yes. I feel that so often with these really kind of fast-moving little, like iPad and iPhone games, where the Candy Crush kind of games where like yeah, I'm going, baby, I'm activated, I'm doing this, I'm leveling up, I'm going, again and again and again and again. Then you get to the end of like 45 minutes of playing, and you're like, oh my god, I feel so awful.
Like, really? It's just candy? Why?
Yeah, this is stupid. And I can't believe it. I mean, there's almost a way in which, like, I can't believe this stupid game fooled me. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess in that sense, yeah, there are some negative effects of something like that. I mean, the whole time, obviously, you've been, practicing hand-eye coordination or what have you. But there are games that are like more worth your time than others.
Right.
I mean, I guess to me, this whole idea of are there negative effects to games? I mean, I'm not someone who would say that like screen time is always good time, well spent time. I mean, I think there's a limit to it. In the book, near the end of the book, I say, there's some experts who say like 2.5 hours of screen time, 2.5 hours of games a day. Once you cross that threshold, you may be sort of kind of flirting with, I don't want to call it addiction, but flirting with problematic gaming. Yeah. I do talk, by the way, in the book, I devote almost an entire chapter to the idea of addiction, which I mostly think is kind of silly, but it is real for some people, and I don't want to deny that. Yeah. I mean, people do waste long stretches of their lives playing games, and I would never say they don't. But I don't want to say, I don't want people to believe that just because a kid likes a game a lot and doesn't want to turn it off, that they're addicted to it. I think that's a really, really bad use of the term. Right. And what I say in the book is that a word like addiction is almost never used to start a conversation. It's used to stop a conversation. Right. Right. I mean, if you want to have a conversation with your kid about their gaming, use words like, you really, really like that game, or you can't stop playing that game, or you don't want to do anything but play that game. That starts a conversation. To say you're addicted to that game, that's the end. Yep. What kind of a defense do you have to that? Right. Yeah. The kid's just looking at you like, okay, whatever. An off switch, right? The switch is on. They say the switch is off. Yeah. But anyway, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there can be problematic gaming. There is problematic gaming, and some people actually need therapy for it. And okay. That's fine, and I think people who need it should get it. Yeah. But I think it's pretty rare. Yeah. And I guess to me, a more constructive way to look at the gaming that most people do and that most of our kids do is look at it more holistically, in that the game, more often than not, is probably the only time in their day when they're getting really good, concentrated, focused, personalized feedback about what they're doing. If you spend all day in school and school is boring, and people aren't really interested in what you're doing or what you're thinking, and then you can sit down with a game that responds to your every movement. Right, you're in control. Screen, you're in control. And by the way, you're in control in a way that can connect you with your friends. That's a really appealing thing. And if you look at it from that point of view, why would you deny a kid that? At least a taste of that. So I guess the thing that I say is that, parents, and I guess even, spouses, right? Gamers in general. Yeah. I guess people should look at games from that point of view. And one of the prescriptions that I have in the game, or in the book, is that if you really worry about your kids' games, you shouldn't stand in the doorway and just kind of, your arms folded and say, "Oh my God, I hate this game." You should sit down on the couch You should ask your kid to talk to you about the game, tell you what they like about it, what they get out of it, and play the game. Like, have them give you the controller. Right? I think that is like the best treatment of all. Because you'll realize, on the one hand, it's hard. On the other hand, it's really can be really fun. And you'll realize very quickly what your kid is getting out of the game. And what I say in the book is that you should really think about, you know, if you're going to play the game, you should think about the kind of gamer you are and the kind of modeling, the play you want to model. Because your kids are going to really be watching you very closely. Especially, I mean, think about this, especially if, you know, all of a sudden your mom or your dad sits down and wants to play this game, you know, that you really love.
Right, all the time. Like, Dad, yeah.
In a way, it can be a really cool thing, right?
Yeah,
you can like share
definitely
with your kids, but you really need to, you know, you just want to do it carefully.
Yes.
I mean, you can fail all over the place. You want to, you know, you don't want to be like a crappy gamer.
Right. Yeah. Just start raging all over the place and upset because you lose all the time. Yes. It's supposed and meant to be fun. Yeah. I definitely want to thank you so much for spending the time with me. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great book. Even if you aren't a teacher or educator or you're just a gamer, you should definitely check out this book. It will definitely give you more, probably even more of an appreciation for some of the games that you play. I mean, and not even to dive back too much back into the conversation, but I remember one of the chapters, I think you were talking about, and I can't even remember her name, where she was using Second Life. One of the teachers was using Second Life and using World of Warcraft to like teach, you know, a lot of her kids, and how she explained to a parent that came into her classroom what the kid was actually getting out of it, you know, just learning economy, learning, you know, all different kinds of concepts and literacy, you know, the reading level that it is required in World of Warcraft, that kind of thing. And
interestingly enough, that was the reading level, the fact that World of Warcraft is on, I think, is a 10th grade reading level. That really was like something people could take to the bank, you know? Right.
Like opener was like ding, you know, that was something they could relate to an actual Common Core standard. Like, oh wow, are you serious? What? But it's this book definitely gives everybody, you know, regardless of what perspective they're coming from in terms of looking at video games as a culture or as a hobby or as an educational tool, it definitely opens your eyes into how to look at it in a different way and actually see what's going on in the background, you know, in people's minds when they're, you know, when you're actually playing certain types of games and everything. So definitely, ladies and gentlemen. Say what?
One of the things that I was really interested in doing was kind of, in a way, sort of translating some of this stuff, not just for parents or teachers, but for gamers themselves.
Yes.
One of the things I'm really hoping is that gamers will buy the game, or gamers will buy the book. Gamers will buy the book, especially like young gamers, like, you know, high school, middle school, and read it and sort of underline the good parts for their parents. Because I do think we need to have a sort of a different kind of conversation. And I mean, one of the things I'm hoping will happen is that gamers will be able to, after reading this book, have sort of a better vocabulary that they can take to their parents and their teachers, to what I call sort of the gatekeepers in their lives. Because I mean, you know, it's in their interest too to be able to describe what's happening. So yeah, no, I appreciate the fact that you kind of, you know, that's something, a strand that came out.
Yes, it was a very pronounced strand throughout this entire book.
I've got definitely three like readers in mind. You know, like you say, I've got teachers and I've got parents, but I also want gamers to read this book.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like you enjoyed it, which is really very gratifying to me, because one of the things I was most nervous about was that like gamers would read this and they'd be like, who is this dude? He doesn't understand any of it.
No, that was definitely the opposite. Definitely the opposite.
It's hard to try to kind of, I mean, I can't tell you how every game works, and I certainly can't play most of these games very well. But I do feel like I have kind of a basic understanding of what the appeal is.
Yes. Definitely, it definitely shone, and it showed through. It shone through in the text as I was reading it. Definitely carried across. Definitely, very well. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, the name of the book, as you see over here and on the side, The Game Believes in You: How Digital Play Can Make Our Kids Smarter. Greg Toppo, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Really fun. Thanks so much. I had a great time.
I did as well. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the show. We thank you guys for being here. Definitely make certain you're always here on Ladies of the Round Table, Wednesdays at 9 p.m. We are the Geekswagg squad from Heed Magazine. Thanks once again to Greg Toppo, and we will see you later.